Good afternoon and welcome to the Rotary Club of Madison. I'm Anthony Gray, Club President. Thank you so much for joining us today. Please remain standing for our opening patriotic song. Chad Bartell will lead us in singing, and on the steel drum, This Land, followed by Margaritaville.
All right, please help me singing this Woody Guthrie classic. Here we go. This land is your land, this land is my land, from California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me. As I was walking that ribbon-up highway, I saw above me and in the skyway, I saw below me the golden valley. This land was made for you and me. This land is your land, this land is my land, from California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me. Okay. A little different than I had written. That's okay. All right, this next one, it's another kind of national anthem, but this is the national anthem of Jimmy Buffett, right? We have any parrot heads out there? Yeah? All right, citizens of Margaritaville, let's unite and find that lost shaker of salt.
Thank you so much, Chad, for that rousing rendition. Today's meeting is sponsored by John Hayes and Goodman Jewelers. John, would you please stand? John has been a member of our club for 32 years. He's the owner of Goodman's Jewelers, Madison's longest-standing full-service jewelry store located on State Street, where it has been for over 90 years. They have high standards and offer classic traditions and warm boutique shopping experience. John serves on our Going Green Fellowship Group, and he would like members to know the group will once again this year be collecting batteries for recycling starting next week through the month of October. There's a flyer at each table, and we'll have information in this Friday's emails to members. So let's thank John and Goodman Jewelers for their support of today's luncheon. We'll now have David Casey come up and introduce our guests today. Welcome to the podium, sir.
Good afternoon. As I call your name, if you would please stand and remain standing. Hold applause until I'm done with the list of names. We got quite a list of names here today. First of all, we got Sam Anderson, Augusta Jenny Jeffers. Got Alan Chancellor, Augusta Peter Gray. Denise Hansen, Augusta Steve Mintz. Stephanie Herrera, Augusta Marcio Sierra. Morali Iyer, Augusta Anita Muhammad. Ben Kohlenbroik, Augusta the Program Committee. Jennifer Morgan, Augusta Charlie Bertode. Brenda Moten, also Augusta Charlie Bertode. Todd Violante, Augusta the Program Committee. We have Milton Bond, visiting Rotarian from Milwaukee, Augusta Carl Hamptons. And Caitlin Bausch, Augusta Cedric Page. I'm Gail Wiseman, Augusta Clean Care. Welcome.
Roberta Gassman was our 2023 Manfred Zorzinski Humanitarian Service Award recipient. She serves on this year's Zorzinski Award Selection Committee, and she'll now come up to the podium to tell us about plans for this year's award nomination process. Roberta?
Hello all, and thank you, President Anthony. I speak today for the whole Zorzinski Committee, our dedicated chair, Steve Goldberg, and our additional members, Joyce Bromley, Peter Gray, Carl Hampton, Carol Kobe, Rich Leffler, Joe Linus, and Oscar Morales. We ask you to spread the word about this award and to please nominate community members for this prestigious honor. They must be submitted on our official Rotary form, which is on the back table and also now on our website. The email we all received from the club last Friday included links to the form and also links to the award-winning documentary, it's brief, made by our own club member, Dick Goldberg. Dick, are you here? I saw him last week. Okay, if you're new to the club or if you'd like background help to prepare your nomination, I recommend this very moving video. Completed nominations are due in the club office by October 1. The honor will be presented at our November 19th meeting, and it includes a $2,500 grant to an area charitable agency of the honoree's choice. The rabbi was our beloved member for 22 years. He served as rabbi of Temple Bethel and on Edgewood College's faculty. The club established the award in '82 to honor individuals who've made outstanding contributions to humanitarian service. We seek nominees who, like the rabbi, build bridges and seek reconciliation. Born in Prussia in '06, he was known for brilliant sermons in his huge Berlin synagogue. Then the Nazis burned it down, and they threw him in a concentration camp. Luckily, he got out, but most of his family perished. He settled in Madison, leading his temple. Rather than retreat into bitterness, he dedicated his life to peacemaking and forgiveness. He He was known for social justice, civil rights, tolerance, interfaith dialogue, and reconciliation, so important in today's world. His funeral was attended by hundreds. Both daily newspapers ran editorials and news stories. Church sermons were delivered across Madison. Personally, I was very moved, and thank you for sharing those words to our dear president, but I was very honored to receive this award 2 years ago, not only because of my work, but because I'm the great-granddaughter of grandmothers who were murdered under the influence of Hitler in 1941 in Lithuania by their non-Jewish neighbors. I believe in the importance of tolerance toward all and moving past hatred. Thank you all for helping us honor tolerance and for please nominating a worthy nominee. Thank you very much.
All right, we have a few announcements for you. Ted Billage chairs our Community Projects Committee, and he has a quick announcement about some upcoming volunteer opportunities for our members. To the podium, sir.
Very much. Can everyone hear me? Wonderful. As our August president said, I get to talk about a number of opportunities today. Not one, but two announcements about things that you can do with your peers to help other Madisonians. First, Bikes for Kids Wisconsin will be hosting Dane County's largest hands-on recycling event. The event's called The Big Breakdown. I'm sure some of us can relate to that. It is on Saturday, September 27th, which is not this Saturday, but next Saturday, from noon to 3 p.m. The event is going to provide an opportunity to show this organization's circular economy model, where you break down bikes that can't be ridden so that others can ride them after those parts are used. Through that work, if you can believe it, they have eliminated 97,000 pounds of waste that would have otherwise gone into Madison's waste pits. The work involves some physical labor, breaking down bikes. So kids age 12 and up are welcome to come along with an adult. Work gloves, pants, and good shoes are recommended. There's no need to bring your own tools. There will be plenty there. 40 volunteers total are needed, but counting me, they currently have 30 signed up. You can visit bikesforkids.wi.org to sign up, or there are sheets on the tables. The green one is the one dealing with Bikes for Kids Wisconsin, and you can sign up there. Separately, on Saturday, October 23rd, so next month, the Elver Park Community Neighborhood Center is hosting its 4th annual Trunk or Treat, where they need volunteers to help make it happen. I don't know if you've ever been in a trunk or treat thing, but what it is they have a parking lot. They line up cars, people decorate their trunks, and hand out candy to kids who otherwise might not get candy. For those of us who live in apartments or condos and don't get the chance to do that, this is a great opportunity. They decorate their trunks starting at 10 a.m., but it can be as late as 11:30, and the event runs from noon to 2. They need 7 additional volunteers in addition to me. If you're interested, on the back table where Joanna sits, you'll see a sign-up sheet, and I really hope that you will join me, because it will be a great event. Both of these will. Thanks.
This month, In Business includes the Power 100 listing of leaders who are moving Wisconsin forward in driving economic growth and helping to shape our community. The list includes 15 of our members whose names are now showing on the screen. We can't call you out individually, but if you're here today, would you please stand and be recognized? Thank you so much. I'd also encourage all the members to review the other names on the list and see if you know them. They may be fertile hunting grounds for new members for Madison's downtown Rotary. They belong in the room with us. We have some birthdays to celebrate with a bit of humor or wisdom that complements Rotary's mission. And we encourage our members to make a gift to our foundation's Community Grants Endowment Fund that represents their age, rounded up to 100, for our Synergy Scholarship Fund. On September 14th, we have Rick McGregory. September 15th, we have Ricardo Blank. September 15th, we have Dave Bernstein. September 15th, we have Tammy Thayer. September 16th, my colleague Mike Engelberger. September 16th, Lindsay Yoder. September 17th, Jim Taylor. September 18th, Nate Babel. September 18th, Aaron Embury. September 18th, Majid Sarmadi, my apologies, who says, I owe a great deal of gratitude to all people encountered. Those who were good became my role model, and from those who were bad, I learned not to be like them. Proud of being a Rotarian. September 19th, Dana Pelabon. September 20th, Ann Lucky. September 20th, Greg Zarkowski. And just coincidentally, last Saturday, our guest, Bridgit Van Belleghem, was her birthday as well. So thank you to our celebrants for their contributions to the Madison Rotary Foundation Community Grants Endowment Fund. Please join me in wishing them the very happiest of birthdays.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Rotarians. Happy birthday to you.
Thank you for that, Chad. We want membership to see our current board members, so we ask one board member to introduce a speaker each month. This month, Angela Titus will be making the introduction of our speakers. Angela joined our Rotary Club in 2022, and she is the Assistant Deputy Director and Chief Program Officer of the Wisconsin Historical Society. She's in her first of a 2-year term on our board. Angela, please come up and welcome to the podium.
Thank you, Mr. President. I love saying that. So today we have 2 speakers who will talk with us about racial covenants, which for most of the 20th century were clauses inserted into property deeds to prevent non-whites and non-Christians from buying or occupying land. So joining us on the podium will be Rick Bernstein, who worked as a public historian for the Wisconsin Historical Society for nearly 30 years before retiring in 2019. And although our time at the Society did not overlap, I heard many wonderful things about Rick, so I was delighted to meet him today. And shortly after he left us, he took up the reins of the Dane County Historical Society as its executive director. He holds a master's in historic preservation planning from Cornell University. Also presenting will be Bridgit Van Belleghem, a Dane County senior planner, and Bridgit holds a master's degree in urban and regional planning from UW-Madison. Their presentation, as you probably have surmised, is entitled Unjust Deeds, the History of Racial Covenants in Dane County and Beyond. And I'm really looking forward to hearing their talk. We look forward to hearing from them, and we will be making a contribution to the Rotary International Polio Plus Fund as a way of saying thank you for speaking to us today. And we will have Q&A with the speakers at the end of the presentation. And just another reminder to please use the microphone if you have a question. So without further ado, please join us here, Rick and Bridget. Thank you so much.
Hello, everybody. Can I be heard? Thank you for inviting me. It's a great pleasure. Hold it up closer. Thank you. Glad to be here. Honored to be here. I appreciate your time and attention. As you see, we've changed the title of this talk because Bridgit is going to co-present and talk a lot about what Dane County Planning is doing in terms of racial covenants. And I'll talk about the history. As mentioned, I work as the executive director for the Dane County Historical Society. I've been their executive director since 2019, since retiring from the Historical Society, below Ellsworth. The Historical Society goes back to 1961 when it was first established at the Dane County Fair. Its emphasis was at that point on rural Dane County, but that's since changed quite a bit. And we're located at the Lucier Family Heritage Center in Lake Farm Park. We occupy just a couple rooms downstairs. We have a 25 by 25 foot archival facility and an office. So we do have a lot of our collections online. Our entire collection, our catalog is online. So if you go to our website at danecountyhistory.org, you can see a little bit more about what our collections include. So the first question people really want to know is, what are racial covenants? And they are just sometimes as much as a single sentence or a single clause in a deed or a plat that very much spells out the fact that people who are not Caucasian or Black or Negro or sometimes Mongolian, the words change, we're not allowed to buy the property by law because it's part of the deed and it travels along with the deed and the land. This is, and sometimes Jewish. This is just one example of a deed from Highlands, Monona Highlands, across the street from where I live in Monona. And you can kind of see it's included along with other things that they found that they don't want to include in their property. So sometimes it's a very short and sweet sentence, but yet had a pretty large impact. About the same time that racial covenants were becoming more prominent in the United States, there was also this movement to create racial zoning. And there were a handful of cities, mostly in the South between 1910 and 1917, that said if a block is mostly white, you can't sell to a Black person. If the block is mostly Black, you can't sell to a white person. That was overturned, terminated by the Supreme Court in 1917 in Buchanan versus Worley. And basically it was overturned for contract law specific purposes. It wasn't challenging the law in terms of constitutional equal rights protection, but basically there was a concern that a person, in this case a white person, should be able to sell their property to whoever they wanted. Once that law was no longer in effect, racial covenants became much more prominent. The first known example of the use of racial covenants was in Baltimore, when Roland Park, an upscale suburb outside of Baltimore, was developed by Edward Boughton. You can see pictures of the development in 1910. It was going to be a rather upscale white enclave of property owners. Edward Boughton had asked about the use of racial covenants with his lawyers in 1898, well before they actually started to be used. And his lawyer said, no, it's antithetical to the 14th and 13th Amendment, that it did not protect people equally under the law. But nonetheless, he went ahead with their use. He was a very prominent developer, and from there it spread to other cities like Kansas City and beyond. One of the people that helped Edward Boughton was Frederick Law Olmsted Jr., the successor to Frederick Law Olmsted of Central Park fame, also did Lake Farm Park in Milwaukee. And his interest was trying to use not only racial covenants, but neighborhood associations. And so they were implemented in Roland Park as a way of policing these racial covenants. And if someone tried to buy who shouldn't, they would bring them to court and try to invalidate the sale. You can see that Frederick Law Olmsted was also a professor at Harvard in landscape architecture. And so there were boilerplate covenants that were used in some of the textbooks of the time. He was also president of the American Society of Landscape Architects. And in that way, it proliferated not only through the development community, but the academic and professional community. Restrictive covenants, we look at it, one example on the right in Maple Bluff. This was a plat in 1926, and sometimes you could put a racial covenant as part of a plat. So one covenant would cover dozens, if not more, properties in one single swoop. And in Wauwatosa, this was a sign that hung outside the city limits where it said restrictive zoning, and that was a selling feature. The fact that your property was protected from people you didn't want to live next to was something that they were proud of and they would promote. This sign, when we see it here, is at the Historical Society in Wauwatosa. But it's an unusual artifact of its time. Another precursor that really accelerated the use of racial covenants was northern migration. So during and before World War I, there was a real onslaught of people moving from the south to the north. They were trying to escape the hard work of agricultural labor. There was also a cotton blight, so a lot of the farms were having a tough time surviving. And with the easy access to railroads, they left the South en masse, mostly to industrialized cities like Detroit, Chicago, and other cities. There was a later migration from the West, mostly after World War II, and you can see it was about 2 million Black people moved from the South to the North during this period. This is one example of a photograph of one family, the Arthur family, who left Paris, Texas in 1920. They were given some financial aid when they got to Chicago by the Chicago Defender, which was a Black newspaper in Chicago. They left for very specific reasons. 2 of their sons were lynched in Paris, Texas, and they were all rounded up and locked up and horribly treated. So they knew they had to get out of Texas. This precipitated some tensions between the white and the Black community in many major cities where they were often started to live. There were riots in Chicago in 1919 and Tulsa 1921. We call them race riots, but they were really violence against Black people, sometimes because they were becoming too successful. In Tulsa, the neighborhood nearby, just outside, was a thriving Black community that was almost burnt entirely to the ground. In Chicago, the race riots lasted for several days. So again, the use of racial covenants became another way, another instance of why they became more popular. In 1926, the use of racial covenants was challenged in the Supreme Court in Corrigan versus Buckley, but the Supreme Court rubber stamped the use of racial covenants. They felt that this would be an unnatural restriction to the use of private property. They didn't see this as any involvement with the public at this point. So they, again, were stimulated in their use. The New Deal housing in 1933 started many new housing organizations. Primarily among them was the Federal Housing Authority. And when they were created in 1933, they required racial covenants for an FHA loan. And that continued for a couple decades. You also see here a map that was made by one of those New Deal agencies, the Homeowners Loan Corporation. And they put together these maps that graded different neighborhoods. And green was the highest rated and red were the lowest rated. And very often they were considered the lowest rated and therefore more risky for loans because they either had people of color or foreign born. And so they would measure the number of immigrants and people who weren't Caucasian and simply label those neighborhoods as a bad risk. There's one example in the settling book of oral histories, mostly of Black people in Madison, but there was one instance that there was a realtor, Fran Ramika. She, in the 1940s, sold a house to a Black person, and she was fined several $100s by the governance board of the Board of Realtors in Madison, and also suspended her license. She never went back to selling realty, but that was just one local example. The Board of Realtors had what they called a code of ethics, and they required realtors not to sell to any element that would be inharmonious. And by that, they meant people of color. In 1948, there was another challenge. This was after the Second World War. There was a growing Black middle class. The NAACP was gaining momentum, and they challenged what had been a sale of a property in St. Louis in the area called LaVille. There were 3 neighborhoods that are highlighted in yellow here. These were the only areas in St. Louis that the Board of Realtors allowed their people to sell to a Black individual. And as you can see, there was also about 30,000 racial covenants in the city, citywide. This did go to the Supreme Court, but in this case, they kind of split the baby, if you will. They said if you're a public agency, you cannot support these racial covenants. They broached the 13th and 14th Amendment. But if it's a private agreement between 2 individuals, it can proceed. This was the makeup of the Supreme Court at the time. There were 3 of the justices who recused themselves because they had racial covenants on their homes. It was a unanimous decision, but it was only 6-0. And then finally, the last legal challenge came in 1968 with the Fair Housing Act. And you can see Edward Brooke, a gentleman just to the left of Johnson, who's signing the legislation, and Walter Mondale to the right. They were the co-writers of the Fair Housing Act. It was having a tremendous time getting through, mostly because of Southern Democrats. But 1 week after Martin Luther King was assassinated, there was a new momentum, and that's how the law finally got signed into effect. Now, the Fair Housing Law was in effect, but it took several years for it to really start to have any impact. And to some people, it's kind of a toothless law because they never defined fair housing. And there's really very little money or effort in terms of enforcement. But when it was first implemented, when George Romney, Mitt Romney's father and the governor of Michigan, who was also a presidential candidate against Richard Nixon, he became the first Secretary of Housing and Urban Development with this law in place. And he was very aggressive about it. He was going to deny funding for cities that weren't doing enough for integration. And Basically, he got fired by Nixon. And so the law kind of was less enforced. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bridgit. Thank you.
Deep breath, process some of that information. Okay, so Rick already mentioned some examples in Dane County, and I want to tell a little bit more about what we're working on here. So a lot of the work that's been happening in-house at the county was inspired by efforts in other regions. So University of Minnesota is one of our biggest inspirations, but it's also happening in Tucson, Phoenix, places in Florida, all over, and there's actually a national research coalition on covenants to talk about these matters across the nation. The project started a little bit before 2022 officially. We had a Boys and Girls Club intern named Ippolito. If anybody can find him, we'd love to give him some credit this day and age for how much the program has expanded. But his task was basically to say, hey, these are here. He found about 1,700, or he went through about 1,700 records and found evidence of them. And they focused on the 30s, 40s, 50s era where they were more likely to find them. And with that sort of proof in place, then the county began looking at the larger group of covenants. So that was a very long process that finished in March 2025. Lots of staff involved in our records and information team. They went through 333,000 records between 1909 and 1969 and looked for these words. And I'll talk a little bit more about how. Meanwhile, the state had passed Act 210, creating a form that we brought here today to help people fill out if you have a covenant. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a sec. And then also Dane County Board of Supervisors passed a resolution repudiating discriminatory covenants this winter. And so we are pursuing efforts to pursue, actions to help follow in the spirit of the resolution. So the records team found all these deeds. They're mostly typewritten. There were some handwritten things and things written up the sides of documents that were very difficult for the computer to read. But we scanned the documents, the information office scanned the documents, and then we turned the records into this digital text. So you can see, like this here is what the computer generated. We had about 20 different words that we tagged as being of interest, and then it would find those words in the deeds and tag those, and then we would have staff go back and read and highlight the text. So this is one of our initial maps of where they're located, and you can see that they're in areas that were developing more in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, some as late as the 60s, but anything that was developing before that, they were using other tools, and things that were developing after that could no longer use these actively, as Rick mentioned. So here we found actually 1,030 records. We read some Prairie Market the other night, and someone pointed out one to us that we missed, so that was exciting. And that covers about 4,000 properties. So more than 4,000 properties would be impacted by these documents. And they are still in the title, and the state has decided that they cannot be removed from the title. Nothing is ever removable from the title. So the top 3 places, which would make sense, are Madison, Sherwood Hills, and Monona. There were about, I got just the top number there. And then these are the words that we found. So we did look for more words than this, but these were the ones that were most common here, and I think that reflects who the immigrants were coming to this area and that other cultures that were moving here at the time. The most common phrase that was in the documents was only members of the Caucasian race. A little highlight here is that there were people in the 70s and the 80s that did release a bunch of properties from these, especially at the plat level. So neighborhood associations went back and said, let's undo some of this damage that we had done. And there's about 1,100 parcels that would apply to. Here's a map of Monona, just to highlight some of the activity there. And it shows when the era of time, this map shows by what time, what decade the documents were created. Here's an example of Winnequa Terrace. Here are some of the advertisements that they used at the time to promote that area and exclude people. This is more about the loans being made, and you can just see another example here being promoted to people in Winnequa Terrace. Rehash that. Crestwood is another example, and and a more local example of a prominent planner here who was also part of this process in designing that neighborhood with the covenants as well. Some more examples. This is where Carson Gully was able to build a home shortly before he was to pass. They had to pass a resolution at the neighborhood association level to allow the home to be constructed. He was a prominent figure at UW-Madison as a chef on television, and the university administration had made the basement of one of the dining halls available for his family to live because he couldn't live close enough to campus and own property. So, fortunately, I mentioned we had the Dane County resolution. Before Dane County adopted their resolution, Monona, who's been more of a leader in addressing the past, passed theirs in 2022. Madison just passed a resolution denouncing these deeds and covenants in May, and I hope that Sun Prairie will be next. And if anybody lives in Shorewood Hills or Maple Bluff and wants to do it, let me know. So what we're doing now is the state created this form. It's a really long name. You can look at it in the back table over there when you come to meet us, but basically enabling the private title holder to also say that they don't like this on their title, they acknowledge it's there, it's a terrible thing, and then they charge you $30 to say that on top of your title. It doesn't change anything, it's more just like a private acknowledgement that this is here and the property owner doesn't like it or intend to perpetuate it. So right now we've had 50 people sign these leases or releases. It's been a very much like event thing, and we've just enabled 2 other ways so people can make appointments, like the events like here, like we're here trying to get whoever we can from the crowd. It trickles in that way, but we can now accept appointments in our office. People can come in and get it notarized. I have information on that, and then also you can contact the RASCAL, the Realtors Association of South Central Wisconsin, and set up an appointment with them to do an online notary process so you don't have to come into an office or anything like that. And unfortunately, the Realtors Association of Wisconsin Realtors Association, they have a lot of atoning to do, as we heard, and they want to try to make up for it a little, I suppose, and they've given us a grant to cover the $30 fee for anybody that comes through our process. You can also do it through their program, Close with a Purpose, or Close with Purpose, and they'll cover the $30 fee through reimbursement if you're buying a home. And meanwhile, we're out there trying to engage the public and promote the education, teaming up with Rick to share the history of this and getting more people to sign the denouncements. And then in the near future, we hope to engage people on other restorative actions that we could take to bring housing to where people need it. These are some of the sponsors of Rick's work. And that's it. I think we're available for questions now.
For either of our speakers, thank you very much for your presentation. Have you seen or done any work on advertisements that were done and their relationship to restrictive covenants? The reason I ask this is I grew up in St. Louis, and as it was suburbanizing and the new subdivisions were being built, there was always a statement, particularly in the north and southern parts of the suburbs, that said churches and schools nearby, which was a code that said no Jews allowed. Have you seen that in other places?
I haven't seen that particular mention, but there was often a mention about restricted housing, which meant that there were covenants attached. And like I said, that was a selling feature, and I've seen it in a lot of the Madison newspapers. Not as much as I would have thought. So I didn't really find a lot, as much as I was hoping to, but that's about all I found was the term restricted housing.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I read my deed 20 years ago, and to the best of my knowledge, Nakoma has such a covenant in its association, but I didn't see that on your map. And so I'm just curious to know if you have what you have found there.
We're always happy to add things to the map.
Yes. Said it was against Jews. So, like, we were just in Sun Prairie, somebody brought one to us that would cover 10 houses. So I'll definitely take a look at that and see if we missed it. I also may have produced that map before it was logged in for the picture's sake, but I'll definitely take a look at that.
Oh, I'm sorry. There's a fellow in, I think it's Utah, and it may be Colorado, building a whites-only real estate compound. And he said it's legal. And I just want to know if you have any understanding of it, if there's anything percolating through your industry community about what's going on.
You know, that I've noticed that. I haven't really dug into research it any more than that, but yeah, I'd be surprised if it's legal, but who knows? It's hard to tell these days.
Yes, for either one of you, how does one figure out if their property has a covenant on it?
So we, on our Prejudice in Places website, we do have an interactive map and you can input your address and look it up. Yes, I have some one-pagers. Actually on your tables, there's little handouts and you can scan the QR code on your phone and pull it up on your phone. And then also my colleagues and I are gonna be at the back table over here by the exit with our laptops, and we can let you know if one's there. Obviously some indicators are that the age of your house and where it would be if it aligned with the presentation. You might want to take a look, but we can help you look it up over here, fill out the form, notarize it, and get the $30 covered and take it to the Register of Deeds for you today.
Thank you for your presentation, really great information. I was curious, and I don't know if this goes beyond the scope of your research, but I know Monona is a sundown town. Have you found that association that majority of these restrictive covenants occur in sundown towns, or does it go beyond that?
You know, there was that book recently about sundown towns, and the only one I saw that was fully documented was Appleton. So I don't know if that's, well, I'd be glad to find out more, but I wouldn't be surprised because covenants were just part of a much larger practice. There was a lot of racial violence that would happen if a black person tried to move into a neighborhood. They would make it very difficult for them to have a good residency there. So, but other than that, I haven't seen any references to Monona, but if you have something, I'd be glad to look at it.
There was a film that the Wisconsin Public Television did, and they shared the list of sundown
Oh, okay.
towns.
So it
Hundreds long.
should be on their website.
Yeah.
Is there a question out there?
Stand up so that they I will stand up. Hi, I grew up in Chicago in a co-op, which was across the street from a synagogue. And as I understand it, the original idea was to make it predominantly Jewish. By the time we moved in, it was not that way at all. But that's such a tricky, a co-op, you don't buy property, you buy shares in a corporation that owns a building.
Oh.
And then you have essentially like a lease for the property that you have purchased. I'm wondering, are there co-ops in Madison? And what other sort of tricky / creative things do you see to get around the laws?
That's a really good question. I haven't really studied co-ops in particular. But like you said, the law is very different. But I think the fair housing law would have made it illegal to do something like that in '68. I'll have to look into it more, but I'm sorry, I don't have any specific answer for that.
We have someone on this side, please.
Hello, Alan Chancellor. Thank you for the presentation. One of the slides you shared the language around the identifiers. I've seen others in other places where the language isn't so nice. You also have seen those, right? With the derogatory terms used to describe the people that weren't welcomed in the community. Because I see you shared, but using nicer language, so to speak.
So we could definitely take some suggestions on other words. I think we have about 25 words that span multiple different cultures. So for example, we looked up yellow and half-breed and other things like that. But we didn't find them as much, or they weren't racist. So like there was something about allowing half-breed to be a servant on your property, but it didn't restrict anything about that particular.
You have one more name?
given that, my family goes back to 1907. Given that we could not buy a home in Madison until 1963, all those years of money, equity, all that we could not build up in our family. Have you guys looked at the impact, the adverse impact that these rules have had on our wealth creation? Because some people question some of the efforts that are going on to help us build wealth now, when we were restricted from doing so before. So have you seen anything like that?
I'm so glad you asked that, because I did ask a bunch of professors to do just that. At UW-Madison, Rebel Sims, Chris Timmons from the business school, and Rhiannon Church from Advent Applied Econ. We didn't go through all the 330 records when we applied for funding, so we'll have to revisit that, but I am asking people in that realm to do some correlative studies around zoning, transit lines, and other things that might have impacted the patterns of development and who lived where. So if anybody also has any pull in that direction or knows any other professors that might be interested, I'm all ears.
Yeah, I can add to that. The Board of Realtors did a study, and white people were 4 times more likely to own a home than a black person. And I've also seen national figures where the amount of black wealth in terms of real estate is almost at the same percentage today as it was after the Civil War. So there has not been a lot of improvement in terms of, like you said, family wealth. And that deserves a lot more study and a lot more attention, and should be a motivating force to do even more than we're doing.
It looks like we could have time for one more question if there's somebody who is looking for a question. I don't see anybody. President?
I want to extend our thanks to Rick and Bridget for speaking with us today, and thanks to everyone who attended today's meeting. I hope that you'll join us next week when we'll hear from Sam Rickers, who, interestingly enough, was a law school classmate at the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, and the Deputy Secretary and Chief Operating Officer, who will speak about tariffs and global trade. If there are no other items for the good of the body, I pronounce us adjourned.